Hello, and welcome to LSA's Dollars and Donuts continuing series. This presentation is on tax revenue and economic conditions. My name is Eric Richardson, Senior Fiscal Analyst for the Legislative Services Agency. Slide 2 looks at state and local tax revenue from cash fiscal years 2007 through 2024. Net state taxes are in blue, property tax in orange, and local option taxes in green. You can see this trend has generally increased during the last 2 decades. In fiscal years 2021 and 2022, there were significant increases due to federal transfer payments that filtered through the economy. This stabilized in 2023 and 2024 as tax cuts starting in 2023 began to take effect. This pie graph looks at fiscal year 2024 Iowa net state and local tax revenue. The total amount for FY24 was $19.3 billion. And of this amount, 35.5% came from local property taxes, 20.8% came from sales and use taxes, 19.4% came from the individual income tax. Local option taxes, which include sales and income surtax and hotel and motel tax, totaled 7.7%. And other taxes was 6.2%. That was an increase from prior years due to the introduction of the pass-through entity tax in FY24. This bar graph looks at Iowa state and local tax growth year over year on a cash fiscal year basis from 2008 to 2024. Net state taxes are in blue, local option taxes in orange, and property tax in gray. State and local total growth is the green line. Right away, you can see the large increases in 2021 and 2022 of over $1.4 billion a year. Again, that's due to federal transfer payments filtering through the economy. Growth was less in 2023 and 2024 as net state taxes declined but were offset by local option and property taxes. FY 2024 had the lowest tax revenue growth since FY 2014. Slide 5 looks at the Revenue Estimating Conference, or REC. The REC met on December 12, 2024, and agreed to a estimated FY25 net receipts plus transfers total of $9,154 million. That is a $602 million decrease, or minus 6.2% compared to actual FY 2024. Estimated FY 2026, the REC agreed to a net receipts plus transfers total of $8,726 million. That is a minus $428 million and minus 4.7% compared to estimated FY 2025. The REC will meet again in March 2025. Slide 6. This looks at general fund revenue history on an annual basis, calculated monthly from 1994 through 2024. Generally, this has increased, except during periods of recession. The peak came in October 2022, and there has been stabilization since then, once tax cuts kicked in January 2023. In recent months, this measure has decreased. This line graph looks at net general fund revenue by revenue type over the last 30 years, calculated on an annual basis monthly. The gray bars represent recessions. In blue is the individual income tax. This has mostly increased, although the last couple of years there has been a decrease due to income tax rate cuts. During FY 2025, this measure has actually increased, primarily due to reallocations from other tax due to PTET tax credit claims. The orange is sales and use tax, and that is mostly increased during the past 30 years. There was large growth the last couple of years in sales and use tax. The yellow, again, is other taxes. This has been relatively stable over the last 3 decades. However, accounting procedures saw some volatility beginning in 2021, and then a large increase in 2024, primarily due to PTET revenue coming in from tax years 2022, 23, and 24. The PTET, when it was introduced in FY 2024, was retroactive to tax year 2022. Revenue has come in slower during FY 2025. That plus the reallocations, once credits are claimed, have decreased other tax revenue during FY 2025. Corporate tax revenue in black increased during the pandemic. However, there have been decreases the last couple of years due to the corporate income tax rate seeing a decrease to 7.1% as of tax year 2024, and with manufacturing struggles in the state of the last couple of years. The green line is other revenue, which has been mostly flat over the last 30 years. However, interest to the general fund is included in other revenue. Interest gained the general fund $70 million in FY 2023 and $130 million in FY 2024. So there have been increases in other revenue the last 2 years. Slide 8, revenue source distribution, the 12 months ending November 2023 versus the 12 months ending November 2024. Things to note here, income tax in blue has gone from 39% of state tax revenue to 37% in state tax revenue over the course of a year. Corresponding increase in sales and use tax from 35.5% to 37.3%. Corporate banking and insurance taxes have gone from 10.8% down to 8%, primarily due to the corporate income tax revenue coming in less over the last year. And other taxes have gone up from 3.3% to 6.5%, primarily due to the pass-through entity tax being introduced over the last year. This measure in slide 9 looks at Department of Revenue contingent liabilities report and an overview of state tax credits. Claims came in generally higher every year from FY 2005 to FY 2020. They've dropped the last few years as recent legislation has made changes to tax credits and state revenue. FY 2023 saw a low that did increase in FY 2024, primarily due to increases in the research activities tax credit, the historic preservation tax credit, and the high quality jobs tax credit. The department estimates tax credit claims going forward for future years. Sometimes these are overestimates. Slide 10, we turn to economic outlook for the US and Iowa. This slide looks at US annual population change from 1940. There's been a downward trend since the late 1960s in the baby boom, and this affects a lot of what public officials are concerned about, including workforce challenges and demographic trends that affect the tax base, plus healthcare concerns. Recent revisions by the Census Bureau in December actually increased population rate changes in recent years, mostly due to a large immigration influx over the past 4 years. In Iowa, the population increased by 0.72% in 2024, which was 26th in the country. Iowa's rate of increase was the state's highest this century. Slide 11, this looks at US employment in millions from 1976 through 2024. You can see the trend by the red line was a little bit higher pre-2000 compared to the trend in the green line, which is a trend post-2000. So that illustrates lower growth in the amount of jobs over the last 20 years, although job growth has been solid in recent years. Demographic and population challenges may partially be the cause of lower growth in employment in the US. That also filters down to Iowa. The Iowa employment measure, slide 12. Again, you can see a similar trend pre-2000 that's represented in red, which was a little bit higher compared to the post-2000 trend in green, which has been a bit flatter. Iowa reached an employment peak of 1.6 million jobs in June 2024. There's been a slight decrease from the high as recent layoffs have affected the finance and manufacturing industries. Slide 13, Iowa and US employment growth as 12-month moving averages, the US in blue and Iowa in orange. These have generally tracked each other since 1991, although since 2010, Iowa employment percent growth has been a little bit less than US percent growth. You can see employment growth decreasing the last 3 years as labor force issues have continued to weigh in job creation. However, rates are near the pre-pandemic average. Slide 14, Iowa unemployment claims. First payments are in blue and final payments are in red. You can see recessions in the gray bar. 2022 first payments hit a low not seen since the 1970s after the extremely large increase in payments during the pandemic. UI payments have increased slightly in recent years, but first payments are still lower than in the 2010s. Slide 15 looks at Iowa employment changes since the pre-recession peak in 2020. Growth over the last 5 years has totaled 11,000 jobs in the state, although some industries have done better than others. Government, education and health services, and financial activities, along with construction, have done well, while financial activities, information, and manufacturing have not done as well. Slide 16 looks at wage growth in the U.S. economy. This is a 3-month moving average of median wage growth. You can see the peak in 2022. This has dropped over the last couple of years as job quits have decreased in the prior years and turnover decreases as people are less likely to leave their jobs right now, and employers are less likely to fire people and keep the people that they need going forward. Iowa wage and salary growth. This is a 4-quarter average. You can see the highs in 2021 and 2022 that have come down the last couple of years to pre-pandemic averages. As of the third quarter, this level was at about 2.9%. Normal wage growth should limit cost increases to businesses. This slide looks at the federal funds rate in comparison to inflation, or CPI, in purple, and percent increase in U.S. employment in blue. Federal funds rate is in green. And from 2009 through 2015, you can see that the federal funds rate was near zero. That's probably not going to happen anytime soon. For the most part, these have moved in tandem the last 25 years. On the right side, as we get closer to today, you can see where the federal funds rate is getting closer to where CPI and the percent increase in U.S. employment are. The CPI was 9.1% in 2022. That was down to 2.9% as of December 2024, which was down from 3.4% in December 2023. However, CPI has risen the last few months. So the Federal Reserve may wait to see how inflation holds up, as it did increase in the fourth quarter of 2024. When rates are lower, this should help the housing, ag, and manufacturing sectors, which have seen relatively high borrowing costs the past 3 years. Slide 19 looks at housing permits in Iowa. You can see the decrease beginning in 2021 as inflation increased the price of materials and higher interest rates increased borrowing costs. However, since September 2023, the measure for single-family units has increased from 6,700 to 7,700 through November 2024, and that's in red. In blue, total housing units have also increased from 10,400 in May 2024 to 12,200 in November 2024. The prospect of both reduced inflation and lower borrowing costs, along with high valuations, may create the conditions for upswing in permits in the next few years, especially with the extraordinary demand for housing. Even with higher inflation, buyers and sellers may be coming to terms with higher interest rates, which could normalize the housing market. Slide 20 looks at household debt service as a percent of disposable personal income. Nationally, debt service percentages have recently reached pre-pandemic levels and are still far below pre-financial crisis levels. That leaves room for consumers to still carry the economy as they have done the last few years. However, price increases in recent years in childcare, insurance, and other necessities have placed stress on parents and consumers. This looks at U.S. crude oil production in barrels per day. This measure reached an all-time high recently of 13.5 million barrels per day. That's more than Saudi Arabia. Oil plus natural gas can help keep the U.S. relatively independent of foreign sources of energy if desired, although much of our oil and gas gets exported and have helped limit oil prices worldwide. Low gas prices this past fall increased consumer confidence and buttressed consumer spending. Saudi Arabia could decide to flood the market and decrease prices, although OPEC Plus has held off with supply increases until at least April, as world demand has fallen, especially in China and the US. Conversely, Middle Eastern or other geopolitical instability could increase prices. Slide 22. This looks at US crude oil wells. In blue, you can see there are fewer rigs up than in the past in the US, although they are more efficient. Lower prices could prevent investment and new infrastructure from coming online. In green, rigs are expected to further decrease in the future as drilled but uncompleted wells, or DUCs, have also decreased. DUCs are wells that have been drilled but are not yet ready to produce oil or natural gas. They can be brought into production more quickly and cheaply than new wells. However, the relatively low price of oil and gas currently limits further investment by energy companies. The upshot is that America's role in maintaining relatively low oil prices on the world market and low gas prices at home is at medium-term risk due to lack of investment in recent years. Slide 23 looks at U.S. government public debt outstanding. The annual debt or deficit is in red. This has been very high since 2020 in the pandemic. Total debt for the U.S. is in blue and has kept growing throughout the last 2 decades. There's no prospect of any major decrease in the deficit in the near term, although that is to be determined depending on what happens with tax and spending policies from the new administration. This line graph looks at federal public debt as a percentage of GDP, which reached 120% in recent years. This comes from the Office of Management and Budget compared to the Congressional Budget Office, which has a different measurement. The federal borrowing costs are expected to be 3.4% of GDP in 2024. That's the highest since 1940 and increased to 4.1% by 2034, according to the CBO. And this poses budget concerns and could affect Iowa in the future if high debt makes it more difficult for the federal government to make transfer payments to states. You can find our fiscal division website and the publications that we produce at the link. You can also subscribe to LSA's fiscal division products at the second link, and my staff contact information is included as well if you have any questions. Thank you very much.